agenda went away. Okay. Okay, item B. Superintendent Drezek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a reminder that all Enfield Public Schools will dismiss early with lunch tomorrow, Wednesday, October 26th, for our staff half-day PD, and again on Thursday, November 3rd, for elementary conferences and secondary staff half-day PD. Students will not attend school on Tuesday, November 8th for Election Day, and for staff, they'll attend a full professional learning day. All students will be dismissed early with lunch on Wednesday, November 9th, for elementary afternoon conferences and secondary staff half professional learning day. And all Enfield Public Schools will be closed on Friday, November 11th, in observation of Veterans Day. In addition, I have to take this opportunity to congratulate Sydney Marshall, who is an Enfield High School soccer player who had a hat trick last week and is now a candidate for the Channel 3 Athlete of the Week. I also have to apologize for her because I couldn't vote for her. The reason is my nephew was also a candidate for the Athlete of the Week, and he threw 7 touchdowns last week, and I already voted. So, Sydney, I apologize. I figure I got a 50-50 shot on this one, so if he doesn't win, I hope you do, but I apologize in advance. I want to mention also to the board, those of you who may have students in our primary schools, we talked a lot about restructuring some of the things in the district, and I'll get into that in further weeks. But one of the things you all know, Dr. Carrie Wiley, formerly as our STEAM coordinator for the district, but in her new role, one of the things that we recognized was the amount of technology that we currently own and procured over the years, and really the availability of not just staff using it and students using it, but really engaging families using it. So she's announcing that on the week of November 14th, 15th, and 16th, we're hosting digital citizenship nights at our 3 primary schools, with Henry Barnard being on November 14th. And there's 2 options. It's from 5:15 to 6, and then 6:15 to 7. The following night, I believe, is Enfield Street School on the 15th, and then on the 17th is Hazardville Memorial School. This is an opportunity for parents to bring in your students' iPads and to support learning at home. So you can discuss iPad basics, caring for the iPad, screen time. Be a lot of discussion about digital citizenship, which actually came up from this dais from one of you. I think mentioned that at one point during our meetings. It's also a discussion on internet safety, especially for our youngest learners, and I believe it might have been you, Mrs. Cushman, who had asked that once before, and also best practices for Enfield Public Schools instructional apps. One of the things we recognized over the last few years is we have a lot of technology in the district that was kind of forced upon us out of necessity, but we're really not maximizing the use and the potential for it. So this is something that we are excited to start rolling out, and I can't tell you that we don't have a better person than Dr. Wiley, who's going to be leading these conversations with families and with staff members who choose to attend. So look out, that'll be included in your packets going forward, but I know some of you have children in those schools, so you don't have to ask me about it. It's happening at your kid's school, Mrs. Pickett. Next, I know I made reference to it, and I've gotten a lot of inquiries from families. Tomorrow, there's going to be a school messenger going out. And I'm also going to ask our principals and building leaders to send them out in their newsletters in the event people don't subscribe to School Messenger for the Superintendent's Advisory Council. The application, I think Mr. Barassa, he put together an electronic form, which actually looks really cool on a phone, because that's how most people will react to it. It's not a formal application. It's pretty simple, like I stated last time. You need to know who you are, where your kids go to school, how do we reach you? And then most important, one of the things I was just interested for my own knowledge is, why are you interested in participating in something like this? I don't know the reaction that I'm going to get formally, so I haven't said it, and I've gotten this question a lot, how many people pick me, those types of things. I don't know if I'm going to get 100 responses or if I'm going to get 12 responses, so it really is going to be depending upon what the responses go, but I'm hoping to make it making sure that we're representing the entire community from not just all different levels, but different backgrounds. So that's really my focus on putting this together, with the hopes in the coming weeks to set that first meeting where, as I stated here, the agenda is going to be driven by the group. Nobody wants to sit in a room and listen to my agenda. That's not the purpose of this. So that is coming tomorrow. You'll get a school messenger from us tomorrow. Sorry, that one's coming from me. I know you get them from your schools all the time. That one's mine. And once we start gathering applications, we'll leave them open for a bit. and then we'll get communication out to those who are willing to participate. And lastly, this actually just got released formally to me today. I know it's been a topic of conversation, I'm sure, nationally, and it's been referenced on national news shows. But as we've started this school year, we talked about this briefly last time, you've started to see sort of a theme from me and what I'm going to use my time for about what we're doing and the changes that we need to make in order to meet our kids where they are. And we talked at length last time by using the Ed site, and I apologize, Ms. Pickett, you happened to miss the meeting. I know you would have went nuts using that because you do work for the state. But one of the themes last week was really getting an idea of what do our kids make, who are our kids? Who are we? What makes up our demographics in our kids, and identifying those needs. And I mentioned last week, Mr. LeBlanc is not here, but I appreciated when he had asked for an academic update because we wanted to make sure that we're putting things in context. This is the first snapshot that we're getting post-COVID, and that's not an excuse. It's not pointing fingers. This is what it is. This is what our kids have been through the last 2 years, and this is really the first snapshot that we're getting on what we're dealing with. From an academic perspective. And we've talked briefly, and we started off with our equity statement and the importance of establishing that. Then we had a SEL presentation. We know people have their own interpretation of what that is. We wanted to show you what we're doing. We took a look at our demographics last meeting to show this is what our needs of our students are. And before we start drilling down into what our results are in Enfield, we have to take a step back and look at what has happened over these last 2 years. And there's been a lot of apparently media attention about this because people keep asking me, have you seen it? And my answer is yes. But what's known as the National Report Card was released earlier this week. And that is really the first opportunity that as a nation and also as a state that we can look at general performance of our kids post-pandemic, post-COVID era. And just to sort of highlight or lowlight, however you want to look at it, but the reality is the numbers are what they are. But that really has to drive our decisions and has to drive the supports that we're going to put in place for kids going forward. We've talked about we need to have almost like a reset, and I don't like saying that, but the reality is the old way of looking at performance data of year after year after year, there's a pretty significant event jammed in there from 2019 to today, and we have to put that in context. But just to put it in context, traditionally when the National Report Card comes out, the State Department of Education releases how the state of Connecticut measured up against other states throughout the country in the national average. And typically, being in Connecticut, we've always outpaced in particular areas. And I won't go through the whole thing now. I'll just pick out a couple of brief ones, again, just to put it in context. But when you look at percent proficiency in grade 4 for mathematics, as an example, in 2019, the state of Connecticut was at 45% proficiency, whereas the national number, that national report card, was at 40%. So we were outpacing the national average by 5%. When you look at the 2022 year, in 4th grade mathematics, the state of Connecticut is down to 37%, whereas the national average also fell down to 35%. But you can see that gap is now much smaller. So in the years of we're always outpacing the national average, this didn't discriminate against how difficult these last few years were for our kids and how they learned. When we look at reading for grade 4, and again, the Connecticut average back in 2019 was at 40% proficiency, and the national number was 34%. Our number in 2022 for the state of Connecticut was 35%, and the national number dipped to 32%. So we saw more statewide a drastic decrease than even the national average has. So there's perceptions and context when you're looking at these figures. The other thing that kind of is glaring to me, and I'll just mention a few of them quickly, is we have the opportunity to break that down. I spent last meeting talking about who we were in our demographics. Well, this national report card statewide as well breaks that down for you as well. So when you look at your CT average scale scores for, again, I'll use 4th grade mathematics. When you look at all of our students statewide for Connecticut, our average score was 236, and that's the proficiency score for mathematics. When you look at the scale score for the national number, it's only 235. And this is current year. This isn't going 19 to 20. This is what the current year information is. So we're still outpacing the national by 1 point. It's basically a break even. But then when you break that down further and you look at white students, 248 to 245. So the state is outpacing the national by about 3 points or so. Not huge, but we're still outpacing it. And you look at the average scale scores for black students, 211 to 216. So the state of Connecticut is actually down 5 points compared to what the national average is. When you look at Hispanic students, 219 to 224. We're actually being outpaced by the state national report card for, this is just grade 4 mathematics. There's more. I'll just stick it there for context. Asian Pacific Islander students, 260 to 257. So we're outpacing a little bit the national average, but essentially it's a break even. That's the way the state classifies it. We talked a lot last week about our free and reduced lunch numbers. Well, they referenced that the National School Lunch Program is essentially the comparative tool when you're looking nationally. When you look at the Connecticut scale, our Connecticut average at 219, whereas the national average is 223. We're actually below the national average as a state, whereas that's something we had outpaced in previous years. We talked a lot last week or 2 weeks ago about students with disabilities, those kids who only have IEPs, and I mentioned about the 504 process and how we're going to see an influx of students with IEPs. We're about even. We're actually a little bit below, 207 as a state and 209 nationally. And then the big one, we referenced this in the past as well, is our English learners. And the state of Connecticut is at 210, and the national average is 215. So there is this perception, this concept that we're in the Northeast, we're in Connecticut, we always score better than the national average. Well, COVID didn't discriminate who's going to have the most dramatic effect through all of this. And we're starting to see it for the very first time. And this is really the first snapshot that we're getting of academic data post-COVID. So I'm sharing this with you, and there's reading, and there's grade 8, and there's other metrics, and I won't take up the whole evening doing that. But I thought it was important for not just the members of the board, but also the members of the audience and the people who are watching at home to put all of this in context. I've been saying this since we started back this school year, that we need to start looking at things through a different lens. We need to make adjustments to the way that we deliver instruction, the way that we allocate resources, the way that we operate, because we need to meet our kids where they are, not where we think they should be, not where they were supposed to be. The reality is our kids are going to be where they are after what they've been through, and we have an obligation to meet them there. So when people ask, what are the things that keep you up at night? I think anyone who had a chance to see this, and it's out there in public reports, I heard there's been national, my wife told me she saw it on the Today Show. I didn't see it, but she told me it was on there. Of all the things that we deal with in this chamber and in our personal lives, this is the thing that keeps me up at night. This is the first time it's quantified. This is what happened to our kids throughout this process. And it's not pointing fingers at anyone. It's not anyone's fault. It's a once in a hopefully lifetime generation, 500 years, whatever you want to call it, pandemic that we all had to live through. And we knew, closing schools in March of 2020, we knew no one didn't disagree that was a bad thing, but it was necessary. It's what happened when you're dealing with something like that. So the reality is we need to change the way that we're operating, because we need to meet our kids where they are. And we need to make sure that we're moving our kids from where they are to where we need to get them. The other thing I think is that's been, and the reason I wanted to talk more about the demographic numbers is, and it's very disheartening. I mean, there's one thing that's kind of universally agreed upon in the education world, no matter what your thought process is that there is an achievement gap in this country. And we as a country, as a state, and as a district had taken strides to close that gap. It's still not perfect. It's not where we would like it to be, but there was measures taken to that. What I fear, and a lot of us fear, is this is only widening that gap. And all the progress we had made pre-2019 has now been reversed. And what are we going to do to address those needs of these kids to make sure we get them where we need to be? So I'm sharing this with you as sort of the next phase of, it was important on our definition of equity. It's important on social and emotional learning. And I'll share a quote that actually came from Commissioner Russell Tucker today with this, that the results from our state assessments and now our NAEP amplify the continued sense of urgency to act comprehensively with all of our education partners to address the academic and non-academic needs of our students and to support the professional needs of our educators. So to tie back what I shared earlier, I'm not starting a parent advisory committee just because I got nothing to do on a Wednesday night or Tuesday night when everyone. We need to partner with everyone. We can't do this alone. Our kids have been through something over the last several years that none of us planned for and none of us had lived before, but we can't. We get them 6.5 hours a day. This has to be a continuation at home, and if we can't meet them with their needs at home, we have to make sure that there are avenues that our kids can continue to get the support that they need, which goes to what I started with Dr. Wiley. We give them the device. They have the device. They can take them home. But we need to make sure that everyone's on the same page to realize the capability the device has. In order, going all the way back to supporting what I'm sharing with you this evening is, our kids are struggling right now, and we have an obligation to fix that. So that's the next sort of phase was, okay, now this is what's happening nationally. There's some state information in here. We'll break the state information down a little bit further. But at this point, as far as the next phase and what we roll out, I know Ms. Middleton is going to reach out and put on the agenda for the curriculum meeting in November to start breaking down some of our academic performance. I believe we meet very shortly after as a public board on the 22nd, so I don't know if there's enough turnaround because traditionally the curriculum committee has an opportunity to see this. They don't get as granular at the board level, so that's a discussion amongst the committee about what actually, resembles itself when it gets here, with the hopes of by December, Ms. Middleton and her team will come back and we'll start having this pretty robust conversation about where we are. But more importantly, keep in mind, what are we going to do to address it? Ironically, we get to January, I'm going to give you a budget. And that budget's going to reflect everything I've been talking about since September. It's going to look a little different. But the reality is, this is where our urgent needs are. So with that said, that will conclude the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Drezek.